So if you are just wanting to practice today, I've just put my hoop around my fabric there and just making sure that when it's taut and I've tightened up the screw, that we've got that sort of drum-like sound there. If it's still a little bit loose, if you just gently sort of pull round evenly all the way round to make it nice and taut, and then just keep tightening your screw there. You just don't want to pull the fibres out of line. So thread wise, again, I always just say to start with, use what you might have. So this here is pearl cotton, so it's a twisted sort of thread, and it's not sort of made to be separated, and it gives a really nice sort of crisp finish, so that can look really nice, and a lot of people like to use that. The other thing, of those of you that may have done the sashiko stitching before, there's the sashiko thread here that comes in different sort of weights and thicknesses, so that can be another quite nice one to use. Most commonly is just the embroidery floss. So this is the Anchor brand, there's Anchor, DMC, and other ones, all just unbranded ones you can buy. So you can see here, this is the only one out of the sashiko and the pearl cotton that you can separate the strands off. So on some of the stitching that I've done, I've used all 6 ends, and where you want to just make it a little bit finer and more detailed, I've used 2 or 3. So that's a nice thing to play around with if you haven't done much stitching before and you are using the embroidery floss. Perhaps do a few lines where, so I'm just pulling it here off the scheme there, is do a few lines with perhaps 6 ends of your embroidery floss, and then just separate it off to sort of 2 or 3 ends. If you just sort of cut to about that 50 centimetre length of yarn that I've pulled off, that you can then just sort of pull it apart gently to separate the threads. So it looks like it's going to tangle, but if you just keep pulling the end of it, it does undo itself eventually. And then I've got 2 pieces of thread that are just that finer thickness of 3 ends of thread there. The other thing you might like to experiment with during the course is this crewel wool, which is sort of 2-ply wool that you can embroider with as well. It's quite nice. And then the tapestry wool, which is a lot thicker, so you'd need not too tight a weave of fabric to take that thread through. But if you want to experiment with different threads throughout the course, there's just some of the options. So the first line stitch we will try is the back stitch. I've just knotted the end of my thread this time. I'm coming up at the end of the line there, and I'm doing a 1/2 centimetre stitch, taking it through to the back of the fabric, and then I'm coming up 1/2 centimetre along, and I'm taking it back into the end of the last stitch, and then I'm coming up again 1/2 centimetre on and taking it back into the last stitch, and 1/2 centimetre along and taking it in to the last stitch. So you'd continue doing your line like that till you get to the end. If you want to practice on some curves as well, or shapes that are going to be sort of your stems or your lettering, you can just try doing that same approach. So starting with a stitch length forward, come out a stitch length on, and then we just go back into that last stitch. So it's just a bit trickier when you're not doing straight lines, you're just sort of keeping an eye on the shape that you're outlining. So that's your back stitch. Those of you that have done sewing with me before know that I find the whipped back stitch, which I will also show, is a really nice one for outlining, which I'll come on to as well. So that's our first one there to start with. What I'm going to do now is have a go at a whipped back stitch. So we've got our back stitch here, and I'm just going to show you in a different coloured thread. But to use whipped back stitch as lettering, it does look nice if it's done in the same colour that you did the back stitch in. So what I'm going to do is just come up just behind and halfway along that first back stitch, like that. And what I'll do to whip it is use the blunt end of my needle, because I'm not actually, apart from coming in up at the start and at the end, going through the fabric at all for this. So what I'm doing is I'm going to come up from that first stitch in the middle and then go down and under the first stitch, down and under the second stitch, and carry along like that to the end, which, if you are doing it as sort of lettering or as an outline, what it does is it hides the point that the needle's gone in for the back stitch, so it makes it look like a continuous line, and almost like a little bit of cord. So that can be a nice one to do for your lettering or your stems as well. So I'll just finish that halfway along so you can see. It doesn't like this fabric, this thickness of thread. So that's just our back stitch there, and then that's our whipped back stitch. And then what we'll have a go at is the stem stitch in a moment. So we've looked at doing the back stitch, the whipped back stitch, and we'll have a look at the stem stitch now. So again, you can practice on sort of lines or curves to have a go with these. So for the stem stitch, I'm coming up at the end of the line again. I'm just going to work slightly above the line that I've marked, just so you can see clearer where I've gone with the thread. So I've come up and I do a stitch length forward, always about sort of 1/2 centimetre. Now, before I pull it really taut, what I'm going to do is just come back on that same line between the two ends of the stitches, and then I'm going to pull it. So that's just offsetting for the rest of the line of the stem stitch. Now what I'm going to do is do, again, that stitch length forward of 1/2 centimetre. And now for every other stitch, it's easier than the first, because now when I go back halfway, it's actually the end of the other stitch. So I can either I tend to go in the same hole, or you can just go slightly above it if you want to. And then you just pull it. And then I go forward that other stitch length. And again, I can come into that last end of the last stitch, which is halfway between here and here, or like I said, slightly above. It's up to you preference wise. And then forward again, and then back up halfway. So again, stem stitch does work nicely on lettering and for anything sort of botanical stems and things. Looks great. So it does, again, because you're going back over the point of where you've taken the stitch in, it again looks like a solid line. You can't see where the needle's gone into the fabric. And I go back halfway and carry along, and it becomes a solid line.